A warm summer night blanketed Chicago's South Side in June 1963. In the smoky back room of a private club, Andrew Michael Johnson, one of the city's most feared mafia bosses, loosened his tie and finished a glass of bourbon. Andrew was a power on the South Side, a charismatic but ruthless figure who had risen through Prohibition and beyond. He was known for a disarming smile, a short temper, and a powder blue 1960 Cadillac that gleamed wherever he went. On this night, after a tense meeting with his lieutenants, Andrew stepped out into the humid darkness, unaware it would be the last time anyone saw him alive. Outside the club, the neon sign buzzed and flickered. Andrew's Cadillac waited at the curb, chrome fins glinting under the streetlights. A few of his men lingered by the door, sharing nervous glances. Rumors of unrest had been swirling. Earlier that week, Andrew had received a cryptic warning. A playing card, the ace of spades, slipped under his door, a silent harbinger of danger. Still, he dismissed it. As he lit a cigar and adjusted his fedora, he looked every bit the unflinching mob kingpin, shoulders squared against any threat. But even kings can fall. Just past midnight, Andrew slid into the driver's seat of his Cadillac. The engine roared to life, a low rumble that echoed down the deserted street. He tipped his hat out the window to his bodyguard, telling him he'd drive alone tonight. It was unusual. Andrew was typically cautious. Perhaps he needed time to think, or perhaps he didn't want witnesses to the meeting he had planned next. Only Andrew and whoever awaited him knew why he drove off alone. The Cadillac's taillights melted into the night as he headed south. A long, empty stretch of road lay ahead. At a stoplight, a witness later recalled seeing the familiar blue Cadillac idling next to a dark sedan with two men inside. The light turned green, and both cars rolled away. That was the final sighting of Andrew Michael Johnson. By dawn, the Cadillac hadn't returned to Andrew's estate. His wife awoke to an empty bed and a gnawing sense that something was very wrong. In the days that followed, it was as if Andrew had vanished into thin air. No body, no blood, no clues, just an absent mafia boss and a city brimming with questions. On that silent summer night, a chapter in Chicago's underworld closed without warning, leaving behind only the faint smell of cigar smoke and exhaust hanging in the air where Andrew Johnson was last seen. The stage was set for a mystery that would haunt the city for the next 60 years. Dramatic instrumental music builds, then fades out. Morning light brought no comfort to the South Side. Word spread quickly in the underworld. Andrew Johnson was missing. By noon on that first day, his top men gathered in a dingy diner under the rumble of the L train, whispering theories. Some feared he had been nabbed by the police or FBI. After all, 1963 was a high tide of law enforcement's war on organized crime. Others suspected a rival mobster, or even someone within Andrew's own ranks might have made a move against him. Every possibility was a powder keg for a violent backlash. The city's criminal underbelly teetered on the brink, awaiting confirmation of Andrew's fate. Police, too, quietly launched an investigation, though few expected cooperation from mob associates. Detectives canvassed the route where Andrew's Cadillac was last seen. They found nothing. No skid marks, no abandoned car, no sign of struggle. It was as if the night had swallowed him whole. Unofficially, officers wondered if this was another mafia settling of accounts. They had seen mob bosses disappear before. Sometimes they turned up in distant cities under new identities. Other times they never surfaced at all, presumed victims of a gangland execution. In Andrew's household, chaos and fear took hold. His young wife, Maria, frantic with worry, phoned anyone who might know something. She clutched their infant daughter to her hip while shouting into the receiver at Andrew's consigliere for answers. But the consigliere, eyes hollow from a sleepless night, had none to give. The outfit's Southside operations had lost its captain, and no one had a map to find him. Behind closed doors, Maria wept,
fearing the worst, but praying he'd stroll back through the door with that confident grin and a wild story to explain it all. Meanwhile, the city buzzed with speculation. In back alleys and taverns from Cicero to Cicero Avenue, men traded whispers. Had the infamous boss been whacked by a traitor? Had he fled with a stash of cash? Some claimed to have heard gunshots that night near an old warehouse. Others swore he saw Andrew's Cadillac crossing a bridge out of town. Conflicting rumors fed the growing legend. The newspapers got wind of the gangland mystery. Though careful not to name names, headlines hinted at a mob boss vanishes, foul play feared. Tension mounted on the streets. Andrew's disappearance threatened to upset the balance of power. One of his rivals, a cruel, calculating loan shark named Johnny the Knife Russo, began pressing in on Andrew's territories within days, as if he knew he was gone for good. Russo publicly acted concerned, even helping search in a performative show of goodwill, but privately he was rumored to be smiling. Those close to Andrew eyed Russo and others with suspicion, but without proof or a body, revenge had to wait. All anyone could do was wait. As summer wore on with no sign of Andrew, hope gave way to resignation. Maria stopped expecting to hear his key in the lock at midnight. Detectives moved on to other cases, and gangland Chicago returned to business as usual, at least on the surface. But beneath it, unease lingered. A question hung in the heavy July air. What really happened to Andrew Michael Johnson? It was a question that would go unanswered for decades, locking away secrets as deeply as the city seemingly locked away Andrew himself. Years passed, and Andrew Johnson's fate slipped into the realm of folklore and ghost stories across Chicago. In the 1970s and 80s, new generations of mobsters rose and fell, but the unsolved disappearance of the South Side boss in '63 remained a favorite tale. Old-timers in smoky barbershops would lean in and whisper their pet theories to rapt young listeners. Each theory was more colorful than the last. Andrew had been fitted with cement shoes and dumped in the murky waters of Chicago River. He had been secretly whisked into witness protection for cutting a deal with the feds. Or he had fled to South America with a fortune in cash, living out his days under an alias. As the legend grew, truth became ever harder to discern from the myth. Police files on Andrew's case gathered dust. Occasionally, a new detective would take a crack at the cold case file, but they found little beyond what was known in 1963. No promising leads, no confirmed sightings, just a notation that his car, that iconic Cadillac, was also never found. Without it, investigators had no crime scene to examine. It was as if both man and machine evaporated into the Chicago night. Every so often, a tip would trickle in, a supposed sighting of a powder blue Cadillac in a barn outside the city, a deathbed confession from a low-level mob goon who mumbled something about the boss in the floor. Each time, police quietly checked it out, and each time they hit a dead end or a hoax. Andrew's file always returned to the unsolved cabinet.
Within the underworld, the disappearance had a chilling effect. It was a cautionary tale. If someone as powerful as Andrew could vanish without a trace, it could happen to anyone. Some said it was a mob-sanctioned hit. Whispers pointed to Johnny the Knife Russo, who indeed cemented his control over the South Side rackets by the late 1960s. Russo denied any involvement whenever someone had the guts to ask. He'd smirk and say, "If I made people disappear, you think I'd tell ya?" As his goons chuckled. Russo lived out his life under a cloud of suspicion, but nothing ever tied him to Andrew's case. He died of natural causes in the 1990s, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave. Meanwhile, Andrew's family quietly endured the uncertainty. Maria moved away from Chicago in the 1970s, raising their daughter far from the mob life. She never stopped wondering, though, and every year on the anniversary of his disappearance, she lit a candle at church for Andrew. She died without ever learning the truth of what became of her husband. Their daughter grew up with only faint memories of her father, just a handful of photos and her mother's hushed stories of a charismatic man who loved her but lived a dangerous life.
By the 2000s, Andrew Michael Johnson's name was scarcely remembered except by crime historians and aging gangsters. The gritty streets he once ruled had been rebuilt and renewed in parts. Some old haunts were demolished, others repurposed into trendy cafes or left abandoned to crumble. One such place was Rosalita's, a defunct speakeasy and jazz club Andrew had secretly owned in the 1950s, tucked in a now forgotten corner of the South Side. Rosalita's had shuttered decades ago, its glory days of flowing bootleg liquor long gone. The building sat boarded up and silent, weeds snaking through cracks in the parking lot. Few connected this derelict site with the long-missing mob boss. But in the summer of 2023, exactly 60 years since Andrew vanished, the silence was about to be broken in the most unexpected way. Chicago, 2023. The city had changed dramatically, yet shadows of the past lingered in its old neighborhoods. In a modest suburban home not far from where Rosalita's crumbling walls still stood, a young couple was grappling with a mystery of their own. Their 2-year-old son, Tommy, had begun speaking words well beyond his age, and certainly beyond anything his parents had ever taught him. At first, it was just odd fragments. One afternoon, as Tommy played with wooden blocks, he stacked them neatly and murmured, "Cadillac." The word was crystal clear and entirely out of place. His mother, Jenna, blinked in surprise. Where would a toddler even hear that? They didn't own a Cadillac, nor did anyone in their family. She shrugged it off as a curious fluke, but then came the night terrors. Tommy began waking at 2 a.m., crying out in a panic. When his father, Mark, rushed in one night, he found Tommy standing in his crib, tiny hands gripping the rails, sobbing something that sounded like, "Don't shoot, please." Mark's blood ran cold. The phrase was chilling, coming from a baby barely learning to form sentences. Who was shooting? Why would his little boy say that? As Mark scooped Tommy up, the toddler trembled uncontrollably. It took an hour to calm him down. In the morning, Tommy had no recollection of the episode, happily munching cereal as if nothing happened. Over the next few weeks, more strange episodes followed. During a drive through the city, they passed a construction site in the old South Side Industrial District. Suddenly, Tommy began to scream and point out the window at a cluster of abandoned buildings. "There! Home!" he yelled, tears streaming down his face. Jenna and Mark exchanged alarmed looks. The area he pointed toward was a run-down block they never visited. Tommy became inconsolable until they drove away. As they pulled onto the highway ramp, he whimpered softly, "My car! My car!" then fell into an exhausted sleep. Jenna's hands shook on the steering wheel. "Did he just say, 'my car'?" she whispered. Mark nodded silently, mind racing. Why would a toddler claim ownership of a car, let alone react so fearfully to an old building? That night, after they put Tommy to bed, the couple sat at the kitchen table, tension hanging thick in the air. Mark, a history teacher with a penchant for local lore, suddenly remembered a tidbit. The South Side had its share of mob tales. Could Tommy be parroting something he heard on TV or from someone he knew? They had avoided violent media around him, and none of their relatives would tell a 2-year-old mob stories. As the clock ticked past midnight, Jenna made a reluctant suggestion. "Should we talk to someone about this? A doctor, or maybe your friend at the Historical Society?" Mark's friend Elliot was an amateur historian fascinated by Chicago cold cases. Though it sounded crazy, Mark decided to give Elliot a call the next day. When Mark explained Tommy's odd behavior, Elliot's initial reaction was skepticism mixed with intrigue. A toddler talking about Cadillacs and crying, "Don't shoot," was bizarre. Elliot asked if either had ancestors or family stories tied to crime, none that Mark knew of. Then Mark mentioned the location of Tommy's breakdown in the car. It was near 35th and Halsted by some old boarded-up buildings. Elliot got quiet for a moment. "That's near where Rosalita's used to be." Mark frowned, not recognizing the name. Elliot explained it was an old speakeasy closed long ago. Mark's heart skipped a beat. Could that be the building Tommy pointed at? Elliot proceeded carefully. "Listen, I know it sounds far-fetched, but there was a mob guy who disappeared in the 60s, Andrew Johnson. Some people thought he might have owned that club, but it's just a legend." Mark felt a chill. Andrew Johnson. He knew that name from Chicago history. Could it be that his son's strange episodes were connected to a 60-decade-old gangland mystery? It seemed impossible, but now Mark had to know more. The past was reaching into the present through the unlikeliest voice, a 2-year-old child. Mark dove headlong into researching Andrew Michael Johnson's disappearance, spreading old newspaper clippings and printouts across the dining table. By lamplight, he read about the infamous South Side mob boss who vanished in 1963, the same name Elliot had mentioned. Every detail he unearthed sent shivers through him. Andrew's car was a Cadillac, just like Tommy blurted out. Witnesses had heard rumors of gunshots the night he vanished. Tommy's plea of "don't shoot" echoed that violence. And Rosalita's, the derelict club by the construction site, was indeed one of Andrew's old speakeasies. The pieces were eerie and unmistakable. Mark realized with a mix of excitement and dread that his toddler was somehow entangled in this mystery. Late one evening, Mark carefully approached Tommy during playtime. He handed him a picture book of classic cars, casually flipping to a page with a 1960 Cadillac. "Tommy, do you see any car you like?" he asked gently. Tommy's eyes scanned the page, and then he jabbed a tiny finger at the blue Cadillac image. "That one, mine," he said firmly, then turned away as if uninterested. Mark's throat tightened. The experiment had yielded a result he could barely believe. There were dozens of cars on those pages, yet Tommy zeroed in on the one car connected to Andrew Johnson.
That night, Mark dreamt of Andrew, a hazy figure in a fedora calling out for help. He woke in a sweat, feeling a presence in the room that quickly evaporated. Was his mind playing tricks under the weight of this obsession? Or was something or someone truly reaching out? Jenna tried to remain pragmatic. "It could all be coincidence," she said, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. In search of clarity, the couple arranged a meeting with a child psychologist. They described Tommy's episodes, careful not to lead the psychologist toward any supernatural conclusion. The psychologist observed Tommy playing quietly with toy cars on the floor. After an hour, she offered a gentle smile and said, "Toddlers have vivid imaginations. Sometimes they pick up words or feelings we can't pinpoint. It might be a phase." It was a comforting explanation on the surface, but it didn't account for the specificity of what Tommy said and did. Unsatisfied, Mark reached out to one more person, a retired Chicago police detective named Frank Donovan, who had a reputation for cracking cold cases. Frank had been a young beat cop in the 60s. Though he hadn't worked Andrew's case directly, he remembered the upheaval it caused. Over coffee at a local diner, Mark broached the bizarre reason for his interest. To his surprise, Frank listened without scoffing. The old detective had seen too many strange things in his career to dismiss this outright. "Kids, they see things we don't sometimes," Frank muttered, stirring his coffee. Mark showed Frank a map of the area around Rosalita's and recounted how Tommy reacted there. The detective's eyes narrowed. "You know, I recall something," he said slowly. Frank remembered a rumor from years after Andrew vanished. One informant had hinted that Andrew's Cadillac might be hidden in a basement somewhere, but police at the time thought it too far-fetched. What basement? Whose basement? The informant died before he could say more. Heart pounding, Mark proposed an experiment. Visit the abandoned Rosalita's club with Tommy. Frank agreed to come along, partly out of curiosity and partly to keep an eye out for safety. A few days later, on an overcast afternoon, Mark and Jenna brought Tommy to the weed-choked lot in front of the boarded-up brick building that had once been Rosalita's. The old club looked forlorn, its windows like vacant eyes. Frank jimmied the rusted padlock on the front door, and it creaked open, stale air wafting out. The moment they stepped inside the dusty, shadowy interior, Tommy's demeanor changed. The bubbly toddler grew quiet and tense. He wriggled out of Jenna's arms and, to everyone's astonishment, tottered confidently across the creaking floor as if he'd been there before. "Tommy, slow down!" Jenna called, but he ignored her. The adults followed closely as Tommy navigated through the main hall filled with cobwebs and broken chairs, heading unerringly toward a door in the back, the entrance to the basement. The door was stuck, swollen in its frame from years of disuse. Tommy placed a tiny hand on it and said in a soft, strangely calm voice, "Down there." Mark's heart thudded. Frank helped force the door open, and a set of concrete steps descended into darkness. The air was cool and thick with dust. Tommy, usually afraid of the dark, started down the steps without hesitation. Mark scooped him up before he could get far. "I'll go first," Mark whispered, voice shaking. He clicked on a heavy-duty flashlight and led the way, each step echoing. At the bottom, the beam illuminated a wide basement with a low ceiling. Old crates and empty wine bottles littered the space. The concrete floor was cracked in places and oddly uneven. Tommy squirmed in Mark's arms, reaching out toward the far corner of the basement. "There," he insisted. Frank moved the flashlight to where the boy pointed. That corner's floor had a slight rise, as if something large lay buried beneath it. Jenna gasped softly. Upon the cracked concrete, Mark noticed something. A patch of the floor was a different shade, perhaps poured at a different time. An expansion or a cover-up? Frank bent down and rapped his knuckles on the floor. Thunk, thunk. A hollow sound echoed back. They all exchanged looks of electrified surprise. Something big and hollow was under there. Mark's voice was barely a breath. "It's the car. It has to be." Tommy, watching his father, simply laid his head on Mark's shoulder, as if a great burden were lifting. The little boy closed his eyes, suddenly looking exhausted. Frank Donovan, veteran cop, stood and pulled out his cell phone with a trembling hand. "I'm calling this in," he said, voice steadier than he felt. "We might just have the break in a 60-year-old case, thanks to you, kiddo." He gently patted Tommy's back. As sirens whooped in the distance, drawing closer, Mark hugged his son tightly. The truth long hidden in the dark was on the verge of coming to light, all because a toddler listened to a voice only he could hear. Blue police lights flashed against the red brick of the old speakeasy as squad cars cordoned off the block. News traveled fast through the department ranks, a possible break in the Andrew Johnson cold case. Soon a forensics van and demolition crew arrived, turning Rosalita's decrepit shell into an impromptu excavation site. Mark and Jenna stood off to the side, Tommy in Jenna's arms, as Detective Frank Donovan conferred with the police chief and crime scene investigators. Mark's mind swirled. The situation felt surreal. Just that morning, he was an ordinary dad changing diapers and heating up oatmeal. Now he was standing on the precipice of a mob mystery, guided here by the uncanny intuition of his 2-year-old son. Investigators descended the basement steps gingerly. They scanned the floor with ground-penetrating radar equipment, a precaution before any digging. The machine's screen lit up with a conspicuous anomaly under the concrete. A large, dense shape, roughly the size of a car, lay about 8 feet below the surface. The lead technician looked up, eyes wide. "We've definitely got something. It's metallic and big." The police chief ordered the crew to carefully break through the slab. A jackhammer roared to life, startling Tommy, despite Jenna's protective embrace. He buried his face in her shoulder, and she stepped farther back, shielding him from the noise and dust. Chunk by chunk, the concrete gave way, revealing compacted earth underneath. Shovels came out next. Each thud into the dirt brought them closer. All eyes were glued to the widening hole. After an hour of digging, a dull metallic clang echoed from a shovel strike. "I hit something," called one of the workers. They cleared soil with gloved hands, and an object emerged. The curved edge of a rusted chrome bumper, then a tail fin caked in mud. It was unmistakably the remains of a car, a vintage one at that. An officer radioed for the coroner and forensic team standby. History was being unearthed piece by piece. As more soil was cleared, the car's full shape materialized, a once luxurious Cadillac, entombed in darkness for 60 decades. Its blue paint had long since flaked away, the metal beneath corroded, but the distinctive grille and body were intact. The diggers exposed the driver's side door. Frank, after getting a go-ahead from the forensic chief, reached down and carefully tried the handle. The door was locked tight and partially rusted shut. Using a crowbar, they managed to pry it open with a shriek of metal.
A rush of stale air escaped from inside the car, carrying the scent of decay and time.
Inside the Cadillac, slumped over the steering wheel, was a skeletal form in tattered fabric that once had been a suit. Even the untrained eye could tell this was a human remains. A collective hush fell over the basement. One of the crime scene techs gently illuminated the driver's corpse with a flashlight. Around the bony neck hung a corroded chain with a medallion, and on one skeletal finger, a gold ring still shone through the dirt. Frank's breath caught. He remembered that ring from old descriptions, a gold band with a lion's head insignia. It was Andrew Johnson's personal ring, something he was known to wear as a subtle emblem of power. Forensics carefully photographed everything as they began the delicate process of retrieving the remains. As they worked, they also noticed the obvious. A spider web of bullet holes riddled the Cadillac's windshield and driver's side window. The glass had long shattered away, but the perforated frame told a grim story. Andrew had been ambushed, likely while sitting in his car. The angle of the shots suggested they came from the passenger side and through the front. He never stood a chance. One detective murmured, "So he was shot. And then what? They buried him with the car?" It appeared so. The working theory formed quickly. Andrew Johnson was lured to the speakeasy that night in 1963, perhaps under false pretenses of a meeting, or ambushed on the road and driven here. Here, in a place he thought was his safe domain, he was killed in his own car. Then, whoever carried out the hit used the basement's dirt floor as a grave, pouring fresh concrete after burying the car to hide the evidence forever. It was a scheme diabolical in its simplicity. Hide everything at once, and no one would think to tear up a basement. They nearly got away with it. Nearly. As Andrew's remains were lifted out, the observers felt a wave of emotion. Here lay a man who had been both feared and loved, villain and victim. The mystery that had haunted the city for so long was finally tangible. Mark and Jenna stood at the top of the basement steps, watching silently. Tommy, peeking from Jenna's shoulder, gazed down toward the unearthed car. The toddler's face was calm, curious even. Mark realized Tommy wasn't afraid anymore. In fact, as the little boy looked on, he almost seemed at peace. Within hours, the site swarmed with media. Cameras flashed and reporters shouted questions from behind the police tape, having caught wind of the sensational discovery. "Is it true a child led you here?" one journalist yelled. Frank Donovan simply replied, "We followed a lead and we found what we found," deliberately vague. He caught Mark's eye and gave a subtle nod. He would keep the strangest part of the story under wraps. The official statement spoke of new information from a confidential informant, prompting a search at the old Rosalita site. Only those who were there knew the incredible truth, that the informant wasn't an old mobster or a hidden witness, but a toddler with an unexplainable connection to a long-dead gangster. Andrew's remains were transported to the coroner's office for examination and formal identification. Though everyone was already convinced, DNA and dental records would provide closure on paper. Meanwhile, Mark found himself wiping away unexpected tears. The weight of an old injustice had been lifted. He couldn't explain why, but he felt relief, a sense that a restless energy had finally eased. Perhaps Andrew's, perhaps even his own anxiety for his son. Jenna kissed Tommy's forehead softly. "You did so good, sweetheart," she whispered, not caring that he likely didn't understand. Tommy responded by babbling something and pointing at the sky, distracted by a circling bird. He was, after all, just a little boy. Forensic analysis over the following days confirmed what everyone on the scene already knew in their hearts. The remains belonged to Andrew Michael Johnson. The 60-year-old mystery had been solved. When the DNA results came back, a quiet announcement was made by the Chicago Police Department. Detectives and historians alike were astounded.
half a century of theories laid to rest by a chance discovery. The police, skirting the more bizarre aspect, credited modern technology and fresh tips for cracking the case. But those who had been inside Rosalita's knew the real hero was a toddler barely out of diapers. As the news spread, Chicago's media exploded with coverage. Headlines like "Missing Mob Boss Found in Secret Grave" and "Cold Case Solved, Gangster's Car Unearthed" splashed across newspapers and TV. Reporters dug into archives to recount Andrew's reign and disappearance. The city was transfixed by the details: the speakeasy hideaway, the vintage Cadillac tomb, the bullet holes that told of betrayal. True crime programs scheduled special segments, and the long-dormant legend of Andrew Johnson came roaring back to life in the public imagination. Amid the flurry, Mark and Jenna decided to keep Tommy out of the spotlight. They declined interview requests, wanting to protect their son from the circus. Privately, Mark filled in Elliot, his historian friend, and a few close family members on the incredible role Tommy had played. Some were stunned into silence, others were skeptical until Mark recounted the evidence. It was a hard story to believe, a toddler channeling a dead mob boss's final moments. Yet there it was, undeniable. Elliot remarked in awe, "This will be one for the books, even if no one ever knows it." The police investigation didn't stop at finding Andrew's body. With physical evidence finally in hand, they opened up the homicide case. The forensic team recovered 2 bullets lodged in the Cadillac's interior. Ballistics matched them to a type of handgun commonly used in the 60s, a .38 revolver. Not much to narrow down suspects by itself. But they also found something more concrete. In the trunk of the car, preserved in a rusted toolbox, lay a blood-stained tire iron and a set of fingerprints stamped into the metal of the trunk lid, likely from the men who pushed the car into its grave. The prints were run through databases. Given the age, it was a long shot, but miraculously, one partial print came back with a match. A man named Salvatore Sally Bianco, a lower-level enforcer in the 60s. Sally Bianco had been an associate of Johnny the Knife Russo and was long deceased, having died in the 1980s. However, this clue was enough to piece together the likely culprits. Detectives reconstructed the murder. Johnny Russo, seeing an opportunity to seize power, probably ordered Andrew's execution. Sally Bianco and a couple of other hired guns likely carried it out. They ambushed Andrew, possibly right as he sat in his car, and shot him. To cover their tracks thoroughly, they buried him and the vehicle at a property Russo knew would be safe, Andrew's own speakeasy, Rosalita's, which had been closed for renovation that summer and conveniently under Russo's control. It was a brazen move, hiding the crime literally under the ground Andrew once walked. Russo's subsequent takeover of Andrew's operations and his cocky demeanor in the years after suddenly made perfect sense. He must have felt untouchable, knowing the evidence of the crime was sealed away beneath concrete. Though Russo himself was dead and beyond earthly justice, the truth of his betrayal was finally laid bare. Justice, in a sense, had been achieved by revealing it. The Chicago Police Commissioner held a press conference acknowledging the solving of the case, and while he didn't detail the supernatural twist, he did say, "This outcome was the result of dogged